Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Shelby and today I'm going to be going over the books that I read in April as well as some of the books that I want to read in March. I had a pretty good reading month in April. I finished out the month with 8 books. I think 2 of those were ebooks and the rest were physical books, but overall I am very happy with my reading for the month, especially given that towards the end of the month I was at a bit of a slump and I didn't read for quite a bit, but I read a lot of books at the beginning and at the end. So let's get started with the books that I read in April. The first book I read in April was Twisted Love by Anna Huang. This was gifted to me by the author, so thank you so much, Anna Huang, for gifting this to me in exchange for an honest review. Twisted Love has a bunch of tropes that I absolutely adore. It is new adult romance, it is enemies to lovers, it is brother's best friend, and it has kind of like neighbors, close proximity vibes to it. I really liked Ava and Alex's relationship, especially the progression of their relationship over the course of time in this novel. There were some thrillery aspects to the book that I quite enjoyed because that kept me wanting to read it. And I love how the concept of grief was explored in this book because both characters had lost someone or something, and both of them are kind of trying to fill that hole with each other. So that concept was also really well explored throughout this book. If you are in the mood for a dark romance, especially one that has some thriller and mystery aspects to it, I would definitely recommend checking out Twisted Love. I gave it 4 stars. It was just a really nice, fun palette cleanser for me. It was just a really fun book to read. The next 3 books that I read in April, I read for a video I did where I read the top rated books on my Goodreads TBR and read them to see if they lived up to the hype. Given that I did an entire video on these 3 books, I'm going to be very short and concise when it comes to talking about them right now. If you guys would like to see my full summaries, my full reviews of these 3 books, I highly recommend going to check out that video. It was a lot of fun to film. The first book for that was Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. This is a middle grade book with paranormal and fantasy elements as well as mystery elements. We follow Amari, whose brother has gone missing, and she finds out that he was a part of this very special agency dealing with the supernatural world, which the regular world cannot see, so she decides to sign up for their agent in training program in hopes of finding her brother. I thought this book was so much fun. I think that Amari was such a relatable and strong character. I love her as she tries to kind of find her place in this agency as well as try to figure out what happened to her brother. It's obvious that there's a lot of love there, and that was really fun to be explored throughout this book. I really look forward to reading the rest of the books in this series. I think they're going to be so much fun. I kind of predicted the twist at the end of the book, but someone who is in middle school reading this book may not have, so I still think it was very good, and I am really looking forward to reading the rest of this series. I gave this book 5 stars. The next book I read for that video was Legend Born by Tracy Dion. This book has been popping up everywhere on BookTube and I really enjoyed reading it. In it we follow Bree Matthews, whose mother had died in a tragic car accident months before, and now she is going to the UNC Chapel Hills program for high schoolers, where she discovers she can kind of like see this kind of magic essence that is in the world. She discovers there's this whole other supernatural world that dates back to King Arthur times. So she decides to kind of join this super secret society of paranormal goings on in order to figure out what happened to her mother. This book dealt very well with, first of all, the racist history of UNC. I think that was explored very well in this book, especially how slavery and segregation kind of impacted North Carolina specifically and what that means for Bree, who is a Black student. I loved Bree herself and the relationship she made. I thought that was all very interesting. The thing I didn't quite love about this book was the world building or the magic system. I just think that it wasn't well explained throughout this book, and I found myself being very confused by what was happening in terms of the magic because it was kind of never explicitly explained. I know I personally would have greatly benefited from some kind of glossary in this book. I just think that having something to look back on to kind of remind myself what different words and concepts meant would have been so incredibly helpful. But other than that, I thought the writing was great. I thought the characterizations and character growth was great. So I ended up giving it 4 stars. The final book that I read for that highest rated TBR video was House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. This is kind of an young adult book with fantasy elements. We follow Linus Baker, who is a caseworker for the Department of Magical Youth. Basically, he goes to magical orphanages and makes sure the masters of the orphanages are treating the children with respect and that kind of everything is up to code. One day, his bosses give him this very super mysterious mission to go to this very secluded orphanage and make sure everything there is on the up and up. What's so different about this particular orphanage that he visits is that it houses some of the more unique and dangerous children, one of which being the Antichrist. While there, Linus's very carefully planned out world kind of starts to come apart as he starts forming very intimate and personal attachments to the children, as well as the master of the orphanage, Arthur, all while trying to figure out why exactly his bosses sent him to this orphanage and if there is actually something more mysterious and more dangerous going on there than he originally thought. This book was so sweet. I just want to protect every single character in this book with my heart because they were all so precious. I think that TJ Klune did an amazing job of making me fall in love with each and every one of the children, as well as Arthur and Linus. The character development in Linus throughout this book was just so wonderful to watch. I loved seeing him form connections with each of the children and with Arthur himself. The message of this book for acceptance and love of found family was just so strong that it's just a very precious book. And I gave it 5 stars because it was just something so magical and special about it. And I think it can really translate across age groups. So if you have been hesitant or on the fence to read this book, I highly recommend giving it a try. The next book that I read in April was a sports romance. It is The Deal by Elle Kennedy. This is a new adult college sports romance, and I'm not usually a big fan of sports romances, but I heard so many people giving this one rave reviews that I really wanted to try it out, and I absolutely fell in love with Garrett and Hannah's story. Garrett is kind of like the school's star hockey player, and Hannah's just this girl who really couldn't care less about any of that stuff, but Hannah actually ends up tutoring Garrett, and this kind of friendship forms between them, which eventually turns into something more. I really loved this book. Sometimes with new adult romances, the steam of it or the romance can kind of get in the way of other elements like plot and writing and story, but I think that Elle Kennedy did a really great job of keeping those things up throughout this story. I loved that Garrett and Hannah became friends first, because then you can really see how strong their relationship is when it turns to more. I think the two characters did a really great job communicating throughout this book, and that's just not something you see a lot in new adult romance. As I said, it was, yes, a little bit steamy, yes, very cute romance, but it was also just a good story and one that I was very intrigued in and very invested in from the beginning to the end. This book definitely makes me want to pick up more Elle Kennedy books as well as more sports romances. So if you have any recommendations for those, please put them down below. I just got Kindle Unlimited and I am dying for some new recs. I gave The Deal 4 stars. The next book that I read in April was a reread for me, and that is Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. In anticipation for the new Netflix show, I decided to reread the first book in the series, and before we even get into the book, please leave your thoughts on the show down below. I personally loved it, but I would love to hear your thoughts. So this reread of Shadow and Bone went pretty fast, and I didn't realize how kind of short the book was, I guess. I didn't think of it that way, but it's a very quick read, and I actually enjoyed it more than I remembered. I thought Leigh Bardugo's strengths lie in her ability to world build and create a very comprehensive magic system, and I do think that this is what elevates Shadow and Bone above other young adult fantasy books, is just Leigh Bardugo's ability to kind of transport you to this whole other world. I decided to keep my 4-star review for this book. There were some issues I found. I still don't like Mal's character in the book, but it was just a fun reread, and it was fun to remind myself of all the things that happened in the book before I started watching the show. So I gave it 4 stars again. Next up, I read Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. This has been on my TBR forever. I feel like month after month this year, I'm like, I'm gonna read Chain of Gold this month. I'm gonna read Chain of Gold this month. But I finally read it and I absolutely loved it. I definitely thought my Cassandra Clare phase was over, but after reading this book, I was like, nope, I'm back in it. I loved this historical fiction. I loved getting to see the children of the characters from the Infernal Devices, and I loved this new high-stakes mystery that Cassandra Clare has created in the Shadowhunters world. Cassandra Clare has a gift for switching between perspectives and really making you fall in love with each and every character that she creates. And it was just so much fun to follow new characters like Cordelia Carstairs, who is a cousin of Jem, who can wield a mythical sword, who has a crush on a Herondale, because don't we all have crushes on Herondales? And it was just really fun to get back into this world that I hadn't been into for a very, very, very long time. So I just had so much fun diving back in. It was such a big book, and it's been a while since I read a big book like this. And I've already bought Chain of Iron, so I am super excited to read the sequel, and I gave this one 5 stars. The final book that I read in April was A Crown of Gilded Bones by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is the 3rd book in her From Blood and Ash series. I was under the impression that this series was a trilogy. I was incorrect, and that is something I did not realize until I was like very close to the end and realized there was a lot more that needed to happen and not enough pages for it to happen. So I really enjoyed The Crown of Gilded Bones, mostly because I love the characters Poppy and Hawk, and I loved seeing their interactions and relationships in this book. This is a pretty big book, and my criticism is that for such a big book, not a lot happened. Yes, I could read hundreds and hundreds of pages of Poppy and Hawk flirting and bantering, but there just wasn't a lot of action for this long of a book, and I kind of wish we had gotten more answers and more action rather than just a lot of pages of them going from place to place trying to defeat the big bad in this book. That being said, we did get a lot of answers to some of the bigger questions that have been asked in the past 2 books, but we also have a lot of new questions that will hopefully be answered in the next few books. I actually don't know how long Jennifer is planning to make this series, but I do know that I am currently waiting for 3 different books from her for different series. Anyway, because of all of that, I gave this book 3.5 stars. As I said, I love the characters and I could read about them all day, but I just had wished that for such a big book with such high expectations, there had been more. So those were all the books that I read in April. Now I'd like to go over all the books I want to read in May. So there's a bunch of books that I'm really excited to read this month, the first of which being This Golden Flame by Emily Victoria. I have no idea what this book is about. I got it in my, I think, March Fairy Loot, and it is so pretty. And let me just show you the inside of the cover. I mean, how stunning is that? That's some pretty stuff. Just from peeking at the description, this book seems to follow a girl named Karis who has kind of been forced into servitude, and her entire goal in life is to find her brother. There seems to be some fantasy elements, and it seems like a pretty short and fun read, so I'm really looking forward to it. If you've read this, please let me know your thoughts down below because it's just something I'm very interested in. The next book I would like to read in May was actually gifted to me by my amazing friend Erin for my birthday, so Erin, I love you so much, thank you so much. And that would be one of her recent favorites, The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. I've been told this is kind of like Knives Out, but fantasy. I think it's about a girl who has been offered this very large inheritance if she can solve this puzzle or maze or something like that. And there's a bunch of other people who are also after this inheritance, so I think it's gonna be a really fun and kind of thrilling read. I enjoyed Knives Out the movie, so I'm hoping I'll also enjoy this book. And it's also Erin's recent favorite, and we have very similar reading tastes, so I'm hoping to love this book as much as she does. Next, there are a few graphic novels I want to read this month. So my father is a big graphic novel guy, and I wanted to read kind of some of his books. So the first book I would love to get to is Lock and Key by Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez. This is a Netflix show as well, but it was a graphic novel first, and I'm told they are very different. So I'm super excited to go into this book. I know it has to do with this very mysterious house where there are a bunch of keys hidden around, and each key kind of has a magical property. And the new family that moves in, the kids are kind of trying to find the keys to unlock like a mysterious power. So I'm very much looking forward to this because I liked the Netflix show, and I know there aren't the same, but I know there are similar elements. So I'm hoping that I'll enjoy it in graphic novel form. The next graphic novel I would love to get to is a pretty famous one, and it's one that I have been wanting to read for a while, and that would be Sandman, and this is by Neil Gaiman and Steve Erickson, and it's illustrated by a lot of other people. I don't really know all of what it's about. I know it has to do with like these kinds of deities. I know there are a bunch of different elements from different mythologies kind of woven into the story, but this is one that my father absolutely loves, so I'm really excited to get into it and to kind of start off the series. Finally, this month I would love to finish 3 volumes of Monstrous, and this is by Marjorie Liu and Sanda Takeda. I've already read this first volume. I've actually read the first 2 volumes of this book, but I think I have 3 more to get to before I am caught up on this series. Monstrous is about this girl who has this like very ancient god slash monster living inside her, and she kind of has to go on this journey to figure out how he got in there. It's kind of like a horror graphic novel. I've really enjoyed the first 2 volumes so far, and I'm excited to finish up or at least catch up to the series. And that is it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to all the books I read in April and the books I want to read in May. Please leave down below what are your books that you loved in April and what are you looking forward to reading in this new month. If you guys liked this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Hit the notification bell to get updates on when I post. I post every single week, and I love you guys so, so much, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!
I'm guessing I was too scared, baby. Maybe I just thought you'd say no. Whatever the reason for